think this is a situation where, again, being in the off project is different than where the project sits in the agreement. In the agreement, there's a reasoned path to settlement for the off project, which is kind of a cookbook of how we get to where we need to be for stability. There are, as Dan mentioned, there are two different viewpoints in the off project. Both of those viewpoints were present at the settlement table. One of them, which is what our group, the Upper Klamath Water Users, look at settlement as being just a better way to go than to continue to litigate. And the reason we came to that, we didn't come to that quickly. We came to that over years and years of time. And I think just in the last, just to kind of drive home the point of why settle versus litigate, just in the last 4 months, I've had conversations with two landowners that had large, beautiful ranches in the Upper Basin. And one of those ranch families said, you know, we started paying for the Adair 1 litigation. That was the very beginning of the adjudication 30 years ago. And we could have bought our ranch 3 times over with the amount of money we spent litigating. Another man, a wonderful man that is now living in another community, said that he basically gave up. He said, you know, I can't continue to pay, you know, $60,000 a year fighting Indians, and I think that's why there emerged two different camps in the off project, or two different viewpoints. I don't really like to use the word camps because I think there is a time and a place for litigation, and there's a time for settlement, and both of those opportunities are still alive and well in the off project today. There is a group who is moving forward on a litigation path with a litigation strategy. There is a group moving forward on a settlement path.
Let me tell you guys, when you own a hydro project and your 50-year license is expiring and you're going through the relicensing process, you're going to give something up. It's the nature of the beast. The operating conditions you enjoyed for 50 years are gone, and you're looking at more restrictive and costly operating conditions moving forward. So when we get into a relicensing in the first place, we know we're going to give something up. What we've gained with the Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement, we've gained another 10 years of low-cost operations and benefits to our customers. We might not have had that given another outcome here. We also gained a cost cap. Our customers' cost exposure to dam removal, if this is where the Secretary decides we should go, is capped, limited at $200 million and no more. And we think that provides a lot of value too. In fact, the Oregon PUC just confirmed that.
If a party chooses to say no, I want to continue to pursue this adjudication path, they can do that. There's nothing. I mean, if in the project is different than off project. I mean, we deal with entities with irrigation districts, and they make some decisions, and they've made those decisions. Off project, I would let Becky address, but. Yeah, I mean, that, to me, Joe, one of the big things out there is the KBRA is going to take your rights or take your ability to do this or that. And, I mean, largely, if there's somebody out there who wants no part of it, they don't have to have any part of it. It's based on market-driven approach to demand reduction. It's not a permanent reduction, which is something we were desperately trying to avoid. It gives people options which they haven't had before. And I'll just say that historically, I mean, one of the big issues is we settled our adjudication contest with the Klamath tribes. This was a tremendous drain on the resources of project irrigators. And there's a lot of people that have issues with that we did something terrible. There's been thousands of settlements in the adjudication. Small individual settlements, one neighbor to another neighbor, things like that. There's been certainly hundreds, if not thousands, and this is one more of them. It's a big one, but it's just like every other one that's happened.
It is complicated, again, because of communities, farms and ranches below Klamath Falls, and then those of us who live up above the lake. We are not organized into irrigation districts, except for Modoc Point. So we pride ourselves in the OFF project in being very independent, and we have a lot of different ways at looking at the world, and we also have a lot of choices in how we proceed. So again, it gets back to that. There are folks who are pursuing and continuing to litigate in the adjudication, and families that feel that that's their best option, you know, that's what they can do. Then there are others who, like our group, who've said way too much risk, way too much uncertainty, don't like some of the preliminary decisions that came out of Oregon Water Resources, don't think this will create a future for our children. So we say, no, we're going to go this way. What would be nice is if we could do that in a little less bumpy way and have it not be so painful.
Adjudication only deals with what I would call water, time, and right. It really does not address some of the issues that we need to address, and that is we need to fix fish problems. And to fix fish problems, if we adjudicate, we just deal with fixing fish problems by supplying water. If we deal with restorations and other agreements, it would certainly seem that we would reduce what I would call the risk to the agricultural and rancher community to just address the issues with water. We would actually have more water available for agriculture and ranching, and then we can fix the problems with the fish by just throwing water at it.
Okay. Some of the opponents of the KBRA suggest adjudication is one answer to solving the water crisis. You guys touched a little bit on that. Some of these same opponents have very junior water rights and would be the first to have their water supplies curtailed when adjudication is completed. What legal arguments do these individuals point to that suggest a different outcome?
No, I think it boils down to a roll of the dice, and it's a gamble. And we were in that same position in the project, and we looked at the evidence around the western United States, in Arizona, in the Snake River. I mean, the tribes are not going to get zero. They're not going to get nothing out of the state adjudication. You know, if they get half of the water they've claimed in the process, you know, it's going to cause people problems. And so we said, you know, provided we can carve something out that works for us, we want to avoid that gamble. So I think really their argument, and again, I'm probably not the one to make their argument for them, but my analysis is that they're looking at the fact that they believe the tribe has no water right or a very, very small water right, and they believe they can prevail with that argument. But if they don't, you know, a lot of good people could get hurt.
Also understand this process started almost 40 years ago, and we've been having the discussion. As long as there's contention, there's delay. And it certainly could be a tactic by what I call adjudicating is to delay the process. In other words, you're delaying a lot of times the inevitable. It's just how much do you want to pay.
The signing of the restoration agreement, the implementation of the restoration agreement does not alter adjudication outcomes. I mean, it can't. And the document is replete with verbiage that says, you know, does not affect Western water law, prior appropriations doctrine, does not affect the outcomes of the adjudication. As far as the timing question, you know, certainly it will, if we're not spending weeks with the Klamath Project and the Klamath tribes arguing against each other, that's going to make things happen quicker on the other end. So, yeah, I mean, it could make it a little more efficient.
I actually have a quick answer to that, which is there's a woman that I know in the OFF project who is part of the litigation camp, and I think, frankly, there are some people who are just exhausted with this, and they say, you know, I really don't care if we lose everything. I just want this to be over. And I mean, that doesn't play well for my family, because we want to continue to ranch, and we want to be ranching in a ranching community. But that's out there, I think. And I think you cannot underestimate, when you had the question about what have we given up, partially we've given up our sanity. And I think for some folks, you know, there's good folks on all sides of these issues. And I think for some people, they've had it.
The timelines for adjudication are set, and so we have a very short period of time. Negotiated settlements are economical, not only the economic for the participants, but as we're concerned about expenditures of state and federal entities, adjudications are expensive for those water resource departments that are involved in those. And so if you were worried about, as a taxpayer, you would certainly want people in an adjudication to negotiate outcomes rather than to force the state pay public funds to go what I would call the full route of an adjudication.
How come Keno and Link River Dam are not slated for dam removal in these agreements?
Well, Keno and Link are very important and integral components of the water control system for the Klamath Irrigation Project. And as a matter of fact, probably the key components if we were looking at flood control as water comes out of the upper basin. And so those structures with the agreement would continue to be what I would call an in-place asset with appropriate modifications for operations of the Klamath Irrigation Project and what I call regulations of Upper Klamath Lake to be retained.
So what's the difference then between those two dams and the lower dams?
Basically, it is because of their value to what I call other economic components, and to operate and fix those is a different, what I would call, mathematical and economic problem or calculus than the other four dams.
Okay.
Yeah, Dan, I'd just add, I just think I mean, Pacificorp produces hydropower at the other four. There's no hydropower production on Link or Keno, although, you know, maybe there could be at some point. And what Steve said, I mean, they divert water for agriculture. We would have fought tooth and nail over those, because that's viability of the Klamath project tied to those two facilities. There is no water diverted for agricultural purposes at the four lower dams.
So why in the KHSA are we choosing to abandon hydroelectric resources when we need hydro energy for Oregon's consumers and newly developed technology could deliver it without impairing fish habitat?
So under the Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement, yeah, it's envisioned that, assuming the Secretary determines this is a good idea, that our four dams on the Klamath River will be removed. But that by no means means that Pacific Power is abandoning hydro. We own 21 facilities around the West. We've got 9 FERC licenses, and almost 10% of our generating portfolio is actually hydropower. Hydrokinetic is what we would probably categorize as an emerging technology, much like wave energy, solar, etc. And we tend to not spend customer dollars on R&D and on emerging technology. You know, we provide some support to the University of Oregon, for example, to OSU, excuse me, who's doing some research into wave energy. But we make investments on behalf of our customers in really proven, reliable technology that we know is reasonable cost and that we understand what we're getting into. Well, so we've got an obligation to serve, and I know that one of the things that, for example, Commissioner Huckel spoke about in a recent op-ed piece was perhaps the misperception that if our dams aren't on the Klamath River, that everybody's lights are going to go out in Klamath Falls and we're all going to be living in the dark. And our business doesn't work that way. We are given the rights to serve customers within a certain geographic area, but with those rights come responsibilities, and that means obligation to serve. So right now we have resources all over the West feed into a grid, and they're helping keep your home bright and warm, and that's going to continue to be the case even if these facilities aren't on the Klamath River anymore. What we negotiated in this agreement earlier is a cost cap. Our customers' contribution towards the cost of dam removal will be no more than $200 million. If the Secretary decides that dam removal is not in the public interest, the dollars that we're collecting right now through the surcharge our Oregon customers have been seeing on their bill since March, those dollars go right into covering relicensing costs.
And if the decision comes out the other way, that the dams are going to remain in place, how much will it cost Pacific Corp to keep the dams in place and find other measures to comply with modern environmental laws?
There's more regulatory process to come, so certainly folks could come up with additional operating constraints on the project, additional requirements that we have to comply with if we want to continue operating. Based upon what we know 10 years into this relicensing, we're looking at about $400 million of new capital investment and constraints on future operations under any new license.
I just want to, and Toby said it, and you actually said it, but I just want to underscore it, Joe, because despite what the public may see or read or hear, there is no dam removal agreement. There is no agreement. There is an agreement to enter into a process to determine whether or not that's going to happen, and and Toby has referred to the Secretary of Interior making a determination, but I mean that's going to involve economic studies, it's going to involve environmental studies, biology, what happens, how much sediment is there, what's in it, what's the effect. There is a myriad of things that have to be checked off the list. And I bring that up because it was important to our guys, to just blanketly say, I mean, we generally like dams, we depend on dams. We talked about Link and Keno. It was important that there's going to be some thorough process to analyze the costs and the benefits of this thing. So I just want to make that point. There is no dam removal agreement.
Thank you.
Before I came here tonight, I was able to go have a cup of tea with a good friend of mine in town who lives in a house that's probably 80, 85 years old. And I said, hey, do you happen to have a copy of your power bill? And she said, it came today. So I said, could I just get a copy of that and see how much this is costing you, a person who lives in town, on your bill? So here's the bill, and for the removal of J.C. Boyle, it's 18 cents a month, and for the removal of Copco and Iron Gate, it's 55 cents a month. So I think it's just important that we are able to say to the people in the city, we care about your power bills and we care about you too, and we didn't run around creating something that was going to hurt people in Klamath Falls. That was never an intent. And so when you have people, and I have had, I had an older woman approach me about a month ago with that very thing, saying, if these dams come out, the power is going to go out in Klamath Falls. And it's like, I do not want anybody to be frightened about this in that kind of way. And then also just to say, I can't buy a bottle of water for 73 cents. And that's for a month. So what we know is that it'll be more expensive to retrofit those than to take care of this. And I'm amazed that there are opponents to this who are actively, trying to create some sort of feeling of warmth around something that is no longer serviceable. It's like not even a good basic choice to be making in terms of economics and taking care of ratepayers or taxpayers. It just doesn't make any sense. So I think we need to be fiscally careful here for this community's future.
Okay.
Becky, I'm really glad you brought the bill tonight, because I think most of our customers look at the bottom line and write the check and never bother reading it and seeing what those various itemized items are. I think your friend probably is good at energy conservation, and that's awesome, because that 73 cents, we've estimated that the average customer is probably going to see about $1.50 on their bill through this surcharge. But, you know, that's great. 73 cents, good for her.
And that's because the rates were capped for dam removal.
Yeah, and these dollars are collected over 10 years. I mean, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is rate shock, but frankly, that was an important consideration for us as well as we looked at this. You know, we wanted to make sure that as we collected this surcharge, it happened over time, so that folks weren't getting hit in 1 month, 1 year, something like that. 73 cents a month is probably something that almost anybody would not find painful.
Have the dams that are under consideration now, have those dams ever been used to store water for irrigation?
No.
Or flood control? No. Toby, sounds like you're the...
No, and you know, flood control, again, I think it's something that folks assume about dams, and that's not what these facilities are about. These facilities were designed to basically manage water on a daily basis. They do not provide seasonal storage. If you look at the whole Klamath Basin, and Greg, correct me if I get the numbers wrong, but my recollection is Upper Klamath Lake provides 242 days of active storage in this system. Our dams, our reservoirs combined provide a collective 5 days of active storage.
There were many parties at that table. For example, Klamath County was at the table, and we elect Klamath County commissioners to represent us. They were at the table. I already shared in the OFF project, there are two different viewpoints. Both viewpoints were represented at the table. So, you know, tribes up and down the basin, project irrigators. I guess I would just ask the question, who wasn't at the table that should have been there?
If I could just interject, I think that the point that's been made is there are some folks within the community that feel they should have had a seat at the table and didn't. And that really goes to, and you all know there's very decent folks that live here in Klamath County, and that goes against their sense of decency towards their fellow citizens. So,
wait, well, I mean, I guess I want to say the problem I have with that, the people who's been out there saying, you know, backroom deals, was at the table the entire time from the very beginning. So I just think that needs to be called out a little bit. You know, how can you be, you know, running around saying that when you were there the whole time?
So were there any, you know, off-project irrigators, for example, that were specifically excluded from the process?
Understand that the folks that were involved in the process were folks that intervened in the FERC process. In other words, they had interest and became involved of their own volition. And so that was the corpus of what occurred. Now, there were, for example, if we look at the irrigation community, our interest was basically two different parties, in other words, two different contractors, which intervened in the process, which represented different contracts and basically different portions of the community. Having said that, there were some folks that said they were excluded, but at no time was any participant barred from bringing any asset or any other person in which supported their position. The Klamath water users, for example, represented 17 irrigation districts, which are individual quasi-governmental entities, very broad in their interests and their relationships. And so we all joined together and agreed to join together behind one entity, and then we all had interaction with that one entity. Now, regarding the districts or the other entities, there were some individuals and individual contractors. We did gather up in a confidential environment, and all of those people that were represented by the water users, which was more than the irrigation districts, we had discussions. And so I think there was what I would call misrepresentation of how confidentiality worked. Confidentialities didn't mean that you had an individual go to the table and didn't talk to anybody. That means that you didn't want to negotiate your contract in the press or in what I would call a purely public venue where it was driven by public sentiment instead of the facts. So entities had different ways that they approached that. The Klamath water users met with its constituents and its boards, which at times was hundreds of people, and had discussions about what was going on in the agreement and consulted with the constituents. And I think other entities had that ability, and whether they performed that way or not is unknown to me, but it would appear that folks felt that they were represented. And I don't think it is as much a factor of how the conversation was constructed as it was how the folks were represented. In other words, whether that representative exercised their duty to visit with their constituents and gather people together and inform their constituents. I think it was more a factor of if you were not represented, it's more of a factor where you represented well.
Becky and Greg?
Okay, so I just want to say that our organization, Upper Klamath Water Users, came to the table late after the first document was released the draft document was released in 2008?
Yeah.
Okay, so what I will tell you is that the folks that were at the table for the OFF project at that time were not out to individual landowners in the OFF project. And it's not easy to do that because we aren't in irrigation districts. So it's not a piece of cake to reach all of us. But what I will say is that when that document released, there were maybe 5 landowners in the entire OFF project who were privy to the agreement and what was going on. And I think that's unacceptable, and that's why we formed another group, because we said, hey, our future is not secure in these hands.
I just want to clarify. Are you saying that the folks involved in the settlement talks wouldn't send it to anybody but those 5, or are you saying
yes,
that those 5 wouldn't share it with their constituents?
They did not share it with their constituents. They did not share it, and I think part of that might have just been human error, misunderstanding what a confidentiality agreement means. A confidentiality agreement does not mean that you cannot share information with your members. I mean, absolutely, you should be sharing, and that's how we operate. We kick things out to the membership and let them know what's going on. It's important. Mm-hmm. At the same time that we have 5 people understanding what's going on in the OFF project, we had how many landowners in 2008 in the Klamath project that knew what was going on? Would you guess? I mean,
all the members, boards of directors, which is a large number of folks since you have 17 plus individuals. There was there's almost 10 individual contractors and whatever, and their families, and so it could be what I call hundreds of people with staff and everything we're communicating.
Greg?
I just want to add, and directly, Dan, to your question, in my opinion, and it's what these guys have said, anybody could have been in the room there. there was some commitments at some point, sign a confidentiality agreement, and let me just talk about that for a second. We were dealing with litigation, the adjudication, the relicensing process, the FERC relicensing process, which is essentially litigation. And so there was a need to be able to have a discussion and not have that stuff used against you in a legal proceeding. So that was what that was about. The meetings weren't secret. Everybody in the world knew. Herald News was reporting that there's meetings, but they were confidential for those reasons. And so there was commitments that parties had to make, and especially parties who wanted to come in late. Because there had been a lot of progress made up to that date. We weren't going to start all over. Some parties were unwilling to accept that progress to that point. So, and I agree. I mean, some of the people I've seen arguing or being the loudest about secret meetings or we didn't get to participate, man, I sure spent a lot of time talking to them behind those closed doors, allegedly.
I did mention earlier that PacifiCorp has settled a series of FERC relicensings, and all of those like this, in meetings, in negotiations where we're sharing sensitive business information, we always insist on confidentiality. It's just standard business practice. We do it, I'm sure most any prudent business would.
There was a couple of years invested, or I don't remember exact timelines, but it was quite a while. Substantial effort had been made. Again, Becky kind of referred to it. At the end of the day, there was 30-some parties that signed this agreement. Conservation groups, irrigators, fishermen, tribes, and at one point, several years ago, we got to a pretty good spot on a lot of issues. There were two entities in particular, Oregon Wild and Water Watch of Oregon, two entities that have historically been very, very critical, to be kind, of operations of irrigators, the Klamath Project, our interaction with the refuge. So they had some very strong feelings about limiting water supply further to the Klamath Project, eliminating any kind of agriculture on the refuges, which is an important part of our viability here. And they wanted to see permanent downsizing in the Klamath Project. And it was something that we drew a line and said, there's no way. We're not going to dry up a community of Malin or Tule Lake or Merrill or anywhere else. And so it got to an impasse, and essentially the way the process, it was done. I mean, you had to have, at that point, you had to have some consensus about moving forward, and you had two parties objecting. So the Bush administration was in the room at that point in time, and when this whole process was started, they threw their hands up in the air and said, we don't know how to go on because we don't have agreement. And you had 20 other parties sitting around the room saying, man, we've invested this time, we're not willing to stop. So a few of the tribes, the Klamath water users, we started a new process, and we invited other parties to the table. There was an agreement to sign that you agree up to this point, and the reason for that was Water Watch was welcome back in the room, but you had everybody else going down one path. They would have had to agree that this is where we're going. Those two parties couldn't get there, so they were no longer part of the discussion.
How does that recent ruling from the Oregon PUC or what does it mean? The ruling from the Oregon PUC on the surcharge.
We were pleased to see that ruling. Basically, what the Oregon PUC said is that we did right by our customers in developing this insurance policy, this Klamath Hydro Settlement Agreement that caps our ratepayers' contribution to the potential cost of dam removal. That's really what that's about, that this was prudent business on our part, and we were acting in the best interests of our customers.
Why is it important that this water balance work? And it's something I've wanted to say since we got here tonight, so I'm going to just say it. When Steve and I and a representative from the Klamath tribes were down in Tule Lake at the fair talking about the KBRA with our community. There was a small boy who came up to the booth, and I have little boys, so I would guess he's between my little boy's age, somewhere between 8 and 10. And this little guy looked at me and said, "Will this agreement help migrant workers?" And this kid might as well have been a 35-year-old man worried about his mortgage. And I said, "Well, you know, when farmers get water, people have work." And he said, "Well, right now," and that's because everybody needs to understand, this year is no cakewalk. There's a lot of people that can get water this year. We live from year to year in crisis. So then he said, "My mom only has 10 hours of work a week in the potato sheds." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Well, how about your dad?" He said, "I don't have a dad." It is time for the adults of this community to figure this out. Okay. It is a responsibility to our children.
We have spent millions and millions and millions of dollars treating symptoms, and we haven't spent enough investing in the cure.
Who's the we?
We, the public. We, the taxpayer.
Do you have a dollar amount, Steve? I mean, I remember I had a dollar amount in my mind a couple years ago when there was a hearing on this topic, and like from 2001 to 2007, I believe, over $500 million had been spent by the federal government alone in the Klamath Basin.
Just treating symptoms of crisis rather than investing in what I would call the cure. You brought out a point. We're already spending programmatically tens of millions of dollars in the Klamath Basin every year tinkering with things. Now, we're looking at a budgetary in the KBRA of about $1 billion over a period of 10 to 12 years. And some of those monies basically are just what I call program monies. In other words, they would be spent in the Klamath Basin anyway. And so we're looking at additional funds. And it depends on when you look at the budgetary. When we first started developing budgets 3 years ago, we were looking at maybe $400 million of those particular funds, and I'm not sure what the dollar, it would be what I would call new money. I, for one, am a taxpayer, and I'm concerned about where my tax dollars go. I would like to have my tax dollars stop treating symptoms and start solving problems. Then they would truly, what I would call, be an investment. Now, we can talk about the investment dollars. In Klamath County alone, if we implement the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, we would be looking at business revenues, annual impacts of about $40 million. And then we'd be looking at, those would be during the time period from 2012 to about 2022, that 10-year period when we'd be implementing it. And then we'd also be looking at the equivalent of over 700 full and part-time jobs that would be associated. That's just in Klamath County.
That's average annual.
That's average annual.
Trey, do you got anything to weigh in? I mean, I'm sorry here. This is right down your alley, and it'd be nice to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm gonna do a ... with something. I was here in 2001 when the water was totally shut off. We were working with two companies at that time. Everybody remembers the good news when we were successful in bringing Home Depot into the community. The Home Depot people had worked very hard with us. They knew that the water wasn't shut off for the entire, the civilian population and everybody else. But we were also working with another good company, and they didn't pay too much attention to who was getting shut off and who wasn't. They just saw it as, oh, your water's being shut off, Klamath County. So we didn't get that company. And you can look at it with the glass half full or half empty, but the truth of the matter is we lost 50% of the industry we were looking at that year, because the water was, quote, shut off. My thought is, in addition to all of these things that might happen if we are successful if we are not successful, and we go back to the bad old days of every year there being litigation and every year there being uncertainty of water, it affects not just agriculture, but all kinds of other similar and equal to and different than economic development projects. And you can bet your bottom dollar that will happen again.
That's a great point.
So I think there's real life examples just from this year with a partial shut off to the farmers. You know, we talked to, well, we handed out something like 3,500 balloons to small children this summer. So that kind of gives you an idea of how many people were coming by to visit with us. Talked to the guy that has porta potties in Klamath Falls. Business down 40% because not delivering porta potties to the fields this year.
A year like this, it's always hard. We have to say what would our demand be, and it always depends on a lot of factors, mainly the hydrology. But we looked this year and said we're definitely over 400,000 acre feet would be the demand for the folks I represent, essentially those that get water from the Klamath system. What we ended up with, what was announced early on was a third supply. I mean, essentially 150,000 acre feet. So then we have to figure out, okay, who gets water and who doesn't get water, which I can't begin to tell you the pain involved in that and the hard feelings and the fights that go on. So we had limited resources, taxpayer resources, that we tried to spread out to reduce that demand. We ended up getting in July an extra 35,000 acre feet that essentially probably kept some pastures alive and some alfalfa fields alive. And so your question, Dan, what would it look like under the KBRA? It's not a total simple answer, but if the KBRA was fully funded, if it was fully implemented, and the reason I'm confident in saying this is because some of the downstream tribes have written a paper on this topic and said this is how, under the KBRA, the system would have been managed differently over the fall and winter, which is where we got hurt. And so the answer is we would have had 330,000 acre feet this year as opposed to 150 to 185. We would have been looking at making up 70, 80,000 acre feet, which is manageable. It's not preferred, but it's manageable, and it doesn't require us to hit the groundwater, the aquifer, as hard as we hit it this year, and it caused problems, and we want to avoid those things. So it would have been a huge difference, and it would have been an orderly way to do it. We would have had a plan on, okay, here's how it's going to happen. People would have agreed ahead of time to not take water in a certain year, a certain circumstance. Joe, I just wanted to answer your question. I mean, the answer is that yes, taxpayers do deserve some protection here, and I think Steve and others have kind of talked about, treating symptoms. But through our representatives in Congress, there's prioritizations. I mean, the priority of Congress and the people of the United States has been an Endangered Species Act, a Clean Water Act, a variety of other things that come with a cost. I think Toby was right on. Just to go out and say, well, we need to get rid of those things. That's not realistic. I mean, I don't care who's in control of the White House or Congress. We've seen conservatives in control of both bodies, and no progress made on those fronts. So Congress makes priorities, but the fact of the matter is we are spending a ton of money. Dan, I mean, there's a number of $700 million floating around about, that's not the $10 million this year for problems in the Klamath. That's not 100 or 200 million that went to coastal fishing communities for shutdowns. That's just kind of the restoration work that goes on. So people say and can be critical of the cost of, we shouldn't spend that much money on restoration. Well, guess what? We already are. I mean, add it up over time. And what we're doing right now, I like to say, it's just random acts of restoration. We put some money here, we put some money there. At least now we have a coordinated, agreed upon approach to solve a problem.
And that just follow up real quick. That $1 billion price tag is that $1 billion of new additional spending, or does that include like maybe consolidation of existing agency spending that's already happening? I'm not real clear on that myself.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. The answer is it's not all new money. It's over a 10-year period of time. Some of that existing spending going on in the basin with agencies is going to reduce the amount of new money. There is debate happening right now about what that is. At one point, we thought it was half of that $1 billion over 10 years was going to be new money. It may be less than that now because of, Congress puts some pretty strong sideboards on funding too, so you can't always move it around. But to the extent there's flexibility in money that's spent here now, in the resource agencies I'm talking about, it's going to be targeted and wrapped into this program.
Didn't I read somewhere that it cost you about $20 million a year for relicensing?
No, probably not. When we started this relicensing process in 1999, we established a budget of, I think, $76 million to cover relicensing costs. And to date, we have spent over $50 million on the relicensing process, and we're 10 years into it.
I think, Joe, Toby, I think the number Joe's may be talking about is in the FERC EIS, they talked about under a relicensed project, it may cost you $20 million a year to run the project under a fully relicensed. There was some $20 million in that FERC.
Well, and I think what FERC was trying to do in their environmental impact statement is say, what is the cost of production under future relicensing scenarios, and how does that compare to what we FERC believe the open power market might be in the future? And that's what that delta represents.
Okay.
Well, this is all what I call about local self-determination. Inside the Klamath Basin Restoration Agreement, we have set up the Klamath Basin KBCC. I never can remember the acronym for it. Coordination Council. And folks that in my neck of the woods, we've had the federal government driving our boat for a long, long time. And we have been what I call the third party outside looking in when we were talking about water management. This gives us a seat at the table. It gives the county a seat at the table. It gives the irrigators seats at the table. So when we have water and resource management conversations, we are a party to that conversation, which we do not enjoy in the status quo. So for us, the restoration agreement is a huge, giant leap for us to have self-determination, to be a part of the process, and to become independent of what I would call our federal nexus, our contracts too, because it's just another way that we can resolve environmental issues, tribal trust issues, and everything, which would be our ideal situation in the future, is to not have those responsibilities, and the only way we do that is basically resolve and quiet those issues.
And so I can't stop. So I mean, this is a really, really big issue, I think, and it's the opposite of Joe. More government control. There's bureaucracy, and there's going to continue to be bureaucracy. But I mean, Dan, when you were at the Water Users Association, I mean, that was the big deal. Applicant status, right? I mean, it was there are discussions going on about biological opinions that are going to determine how much water our folks get, and we are not in the room.
We couldn't even sit at the table with our own biologists to compare science.
Right. Oh. And so it was a driving force for us to be involved in these resource decisions that affect our folks. So Steve laid it out very nicely. I mean, it changes things for the better. It fundamentally changes what has been wrong with the management of the system here. And so, yes, it gives irrigators a seat at the table, including off-project irrigators. And to me, and the county, and my goodness, it's unbelievable to me that we would even ask the question of, we have a signed agreement. This thing's, people have signed it. It is not going away. It is not going away. Why in the heck would we not want our county government involved in that process? It's unbelievable to me.
In the final analysis, I still don't think, KCTA still doesn't think, I think for the most part Team Klamath doesn't think there is a better it out there. This is the preferred policy for us.
Thank you.
So if I haven't done a good enough job of explaining why our small piece of this whole thing makes sense and is the right choice for our customers, I'm probably not going to do it in the next 20 seconds. So I'll give my 20 to Becky.
And I'm going to be brief and just say that, you know, I just hope the community keeps in mind the future that we are striving for our children. I think it matters for our families. What kind of place do we want to be known for?
And I would just, again, state that the KBRA offers solutions to the real problems. The status quo isn't going to get us there. In fact, if status quo may even create more problems, I can envision perhaps further listings of other species. We need to invest in our future. Though it sounds like an expensive price tag, restoration of our ecosystem is an essential component that's going to provide more fish. It would take away that threat of the Endangered Species Act. It's going to provide more reliable water for agriculture. It's going to provide more fish for affected tribes and the fishing communities. It's a solution, and it's a comprehensive solution, and so much better than what has been going on.
These are three quotes. One of the things that has been frustrating to me and a lot of the people I represent is the characterization that this is a liberal agenda, a liberal program driven by the Obama administration. And so I want to read you these three quotes, which came in 2008 when the KBRA was made public. After living through moments that would tax the character of most anyone, the good people of the basin came together. That's Governor Dirk Kemp Thorne. He was Secretary of Interior under the Bush administration. Together, we have produced an agreement that will greatly reduce the risk of future shutdowns of the irrigation system. That was a statement made by President George W. Bush. And then finally, the settlement process is certainly no small undertaking. The groups that have stuck with these negotiations deserve a medal. I've always felt the best and longest lasting solution would come from the various parties in the basin working out a plan that made sense for all concerned. I stand ready to work with my colleagues in Congress to do our part. Meanwhile, I urge those involved in the hydro negotiations to complete their process soon, enabling this historic effort to move forward. That came from Congressman Greg Walden in a press release. This is not about liberals versus Democrats. It's about small communities in the Klamath watershed. And I don't care if you're a commercial fishing community, a tribal community, or an irrigation community. You got a lot of things in common. That's what we all found out. Rural communities, similar values. And to me, this thing's about stability. I think it's about local control. And I would urge people to please vote no on the Measure 1880.